Welcome back. You're joining us on NewsX. I'm Udar Pratap Singh. Our big focus this hour continues to be on the concerns over LPG supply and oil supply, given the crisis in the Middle East, the conflict in West Asia, which of course is just continuing. Arun Kumar, senior economist, is with us. Arun Kumar, if my voice is coming through to you now, let me get you in here on this concern. How genuine is this concern on oil supply, energy security, LPG supply taking a hit if this conflict does continue for many weeks, as is the indication right now from Iran and from Israel and the United States of America? Both right now not backing down, both right now, of course, not quite sure when this will end. Right now, there's no mediation happening. The war, of course, continuing. We still don't know quite what the goals are as well, which is why the conflict, of course, continues in this protracted manner. How serious are these concerns, and what do you make of the steps that the Indian government already is taking to try and mitigate this crisis?
Thanks for having me. I think the first thing to realize is that once the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, then about 20% of the crude and 20% of the LPG coming into the world market has got stalled. So there is a genuine shortage that has already occurred. If the war had lasted for less than a week, I think it would not have mattered. You could have used the stocks already in the pipeline to actually supply everybody. The moment it crosses about a week's time, because LPG, we don't have, our stocks like we had for crude and for finished products. For LPG, the stocks are not kept. So therefore, the LPG stocks which are with the manufacturers or which are in the ports, they tend to run out very quickly. And that's what was anticipated. And that's why, the government, raised the price of domestic LPG and the commercial LPG. One day, the minister Hardeep Puri said that there'll be no increase, and the next day it was done, because I think they anticipated that things will actually go out of hand. Now, everybody realizes that there is a likelihood of shortage, and they have worked out a queue. Who will get 100%, who will get 70%, 80%. Now, those who are going to get less, their production will be affected, and therefore they will try and procure supplies. And that's why the news yesterday was that black marketing has already started. Like for instance, my maid, she wanted to get a cylinder for her home, 900 rupees. It was available for 2,200 rupees, and she had to pay 2,200 rupees. Similarly, a restaurateur reported that the cylinder of 1,900 was going for 5,000 rupees. So the signals are already there. Mishra ji is absolutely right. This should have been handled better. The government should have given out the data, the correct data on what is the extent and how are they going to manage. Unfortunately, our administration is rather poor. There is a lot of corruption that takes place in the economy. And that's why whenever there are shortages, these shortages are aggravated by speculation and by holding back supplies. So not only households, but even those who are producers or businesses, they also hold back supplies. Now, if the war continues for, as you were saying, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, Hegseth, the war secretary of the US president, they've said we'll continue the war till we achieve, success in terms of replacing the current leadership with one that we approve of. Now, Iran, being a very nationalistic, is unlikely to give up very soon. So even though they're taking a heavy pounding, they don't have any air defenses. They're being pounded left, right, and center. Tehran, people are leaving. Other big cities, people are leaving, and yet they're not giving up. They're also continuing to block Hormuz Strait. There was a very worrying information that came this morning, papers, that several ships which lay mines, they have been sunk by the US. Now, if the Iranians try to, mine the Hormuz Strait, then the situation would continue even beyond the war, because those mines can actually damage the ships. If some of the ships are sunk in the Hormuz Strait, that again will mean that the channels will not be usable and the supplies will be delayed further. Now, the government is trying very hard. It has told the companies that are producing petroleum products to produce more of LPG, so that LPG short supply gets reduced. That's a very good step. They're using Essential Services Maintenance Act to try and prevent hoarding. That's also a positive thing, because their hoarding has been taking place. That needs to be reduced, stock holding. Then they've also increased the 21 days to 25 days in terms of supply. That's also a good move to prevent hoarding. However, this problem will not go away easily. What we have to do is we have to try and minimize the consumption of LPG along with trying to have supplies. How do you minimize the consumption of LPG? People are already doing that. They may be using more of electricity and less of gas. That's one possible way. Second is restaurants are already changing their menu and providing those things which use less of gas, less of energy. So that's also another positive thing. Households may also tend to do that. They may also switch to more use of electricity, induction heaters and coil heaters and various other such things. Now, these are there, but ultimately, this 20% shortage of LPG coming into the global market, that'll affect us. We have to try and get more supplies from other suppliers. The government has already said that it has expanded its supply base from a few to about 40 nations from which it's getting supplies. But critically, I think Russia has to give us more supplies. For that, we have to mend our fences. Already, America has told the government that it has another 50 days, 30 days to take the supplies which are there on the ocean in the ships. So that's also a good step. So government is trying very hard because I don't think it would want to sully its image politically by letting this shortage continue or shortage to go to such an extent.
Right.
Now,
And are we then expecting, I'll come back to you, sir, are we then expecting, Mitali Nikore, a possible rise in oil prices as well? Or is that not a possibility as of now in the short term? Are we also looking at a rise in LPG cylinder prices, or is that not a possibility that we're looking at right now? What is your sense of all this impact then on inflation as well?
Thanks for that. So I think, of course, I agree with Professor Kumar that, ideally the situation can only be remedied when we, see an increase in the overall supply. However, in the short term, until that supply is secured, we will definitely start to see an increase, a creeping up of oil and, of petrol and diesel prices city by city. It will start slowly. The prices are being carefully managed and monitored by a regulatory committee. An expert committee has also been set up to manage the distribution of LPG across the country. See, there are two areas on which the work is required. The one area is supply, that where do we get supplies of LPG, petroleum, crude oil, etc. from, and also coal, because a lot of energy production, thermal power plants which used to use coal had switched over to gas and may actually have to be switching back to again coal powered production. So these are areas on which there is an expert committee that's working, and there are a number of countries, even countries in Europe and Australia, that can supply us with gas and coal, and those are negotiations that are currently underway. The other side is the distribution side. So when we look at the distribution side, we have to think about, of course, ways of managing usage effectively and efficiently, and by looking at how industrial use can be prioritized as well as household use. But the bottom line is, if the war keeps going at the pace that it's going and we don't see a de escalation, there will be generalized inflation in the economy, because each and every commodity, the manufacturing as well as consumption of each and every commodity, is impacted by energy prices. That goes into the logistics cost, it goes into the production cost, it goes into the distribution cost. And at each step, you are going to start seeing that increase. Already, we are seeing globally airfares are going up because airlines have started putting a fuel surcharge. This is not only for passengers, this is also for cargo, this is also for logistics. So, we will start to see that generalized inflation coming in. Now, we know that India has done well when it comes to inflation management over the last 2 to 3 years. In the economic survey, we saw a whole chapter on inflation taming and the fact that inflation has been revised now. Even the basket of goods that goes into the estimation of inflation has been revised now, and our inflation currently stands at about 2.5% with that new basket. However, with this, it gives us a good starting point. It gives us a leeway till 6% to absorb these shocks, but we will surely see a situation where inflation is starting to creep up if the de-escalation does not take place in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Back
Let
to you
me, in
there.
fact, address some more breaking news, in fact, coming in this hour. Bharat Petroleum has, in fact, issued an important update on LPG availability due to the current geopolitical situation and import blockade. Supplies are being rationed, with domestic households given top priority. Other allocations are being reviewed by a joint committee of BPCL, IOC and HPCL. Authorities are assuring citizens that every effort is underway to restore normal supply soon. So that's an important clarification that has come in from the government and also in particular from Bharat Petroleum. What do you make of what BPCL has said in this update, Bijon Mishra, and how reassuring will this be for consumers, given the fact that they're saying domestic households will get priority? What does this then mean for restaurants and canteens?
No, that's what I said. In my opening remark, I mentioned that there cannot be discrimination. Every consumer is entitled for their minimum entitlements. So we have to understand that how the businesses can also in parallel feed the consumers in a manner that many of them are dependent on these restaurants, on these cloud kitchens. So we have to ensure that there is a perfect balance, and that has to become very transparent. And that is what I'm always insisting on the government to adopt, because the bottom line is that we all must know that what is the real stock, we get the credible information, we get the right information, and we exactly know that, like they have imposed that you can't book now before 25 days. Fine. So the consumers are now made to understand that they have to calibrate their consumption in a manner that they are able to manage with 25 days of fuel, and that is how they have to go ahead. So what my contention is that the consumers should be made comfortable by giving them truthful information so that they can manage their day-to-day activities in such a way that they don't get panicked and they don't start hoarding themselves within their household, because that will create again a disruption, and that would create also a kind of a strain on the experts who are managing the supply chain, because the experts also are assuming certain amount of consumption which would be realistic. But if you start hoarding, then that would upset the whole calculation. And that is where I also repeated that the state governments play a very important role, because I don't see state governments in the conversation. They are not revealing the data because they have accessibility to all the data. They have a department, food and civil supplies, consumer affairs, which is dedicated to do this kind of work. They are supposed to monitor that how many cylinders have come into that state, what kind of a warehousing facility are there, and which all facilities are having what kind of a capacity. All that should become very transparent, and that is how the accountability process will also come into place. Today, unfortunately, we as consumers, we don't come to know that nearest to my household, which is those gas suppliers, and what are their stock limits and how they're distributing, whether they're distributing in a very ethical manner or not, whether they're following the norms. And if yes, then the regulator should be able to certify, saying that yes, these dealers are doing a great job. We have gone and audited them, and we find that they're doing as per norms, as per the law, as per what we have recommended them, and give them a tick mark in terms of their good work which they're doing. But if supposing somebody is doing some kind of a manipulation, then those guys should be taken to task immediately. So there's a fear in the market. Nobody tries to manipulate the marketplace. So this is what I would always try to recommend to the state governments, to the regulator, to ensure that there is a very good relationship between the consumers, the media, all
Yes.
the
Yes.
actors in the supply
Yes.
chain.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm out of time, but Arun Kumar, I'll leave you the last word, 30 seconds on the way forward.
Petroleum products are not just energy, but they're also chemicals like sulfur and various other things are also there. So, those prices can also rise. So apart from LPG prices rising, there are other prices that can rise, and production has already stopped because LPG availability, say for tile manufacturers and others, has gone down. And therefore, many other productions have also declined, which means unemployment is also going to rise. So on the other hand, on the one hand, consumer will be hit by higher prices. On the other hand, there may be greater unemployment, and NRIs returning from the Gulf will also aggravate the unemployment problem. And therefore, there'll be a double whammy. So in fact, this is a bigger crisis which needs to be handled at the macro level, so that prices are handled, production is handled, investment is handled. All these three things need to be handled.
All of our guests for joining us. We're taking a very short break on that note. Much more coming up on the other side.